because the reality is when you speak up, you almost always win.
Welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Daniel Gilman, and I'm the founder and director of the Center for Public Speaking. We are a global team of public speaking coaches who are working with clients all around the world. We're going to dive right into tonight's topic. Tonight's topic is how to talk about exploitation. The original title that some of you had signed up under was how to talk about uncomfortable topics. The speakers we have who speak about those uncomfortable topics are all speakers who address matters of exploitation. I know that so many of us, all of us tuning in tonight, want to make a meaningful difference in the variety of ways that we serve, through speaking, through counseling, through teaching, through pastoring, through so many different ways. And as I'm sure you found, as it's totally been my experience, when you're trying to make a difference on the matters that where a difference really needs to be made, they tend to be areas of brokenness, topics that are profoundly uncomfortable. And these three speakers we have tonight are all such heroes to me for how they use their voice, they use their platform, they use their time to make such a beautiful difference on some of the most uncomfortable but much needed topics to address. And so without further ado, our first speaker we're going to hear from is Dawn Hawkins. She is the CEO of the INCOSE, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, which is the world's foremost organization addressing matters of online sexual exploitation, matters of human trafficking and pornography, these related topics. I've had the immense privilege of getting to hear her speak in person in Washington, D.C., as well as elsewhere in the States. And then we also brought her to Canada, where she spoke at Parliament and at a variety of venues in what was at that time my home city of Ottawa. And it is such a joy to have her with us today. So please give a warm digital welcome to Dawn Hawkins. Dawn, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again.
Well, thank you for tuning in all the way from Washington, D.C. The first question we have for you is, it's such an uncomfortable topic for so many people. Why did you choose, and how did you end up being part of the movement to fight against exploitation?
Well, there's lots of parts of like why I'm on this journey, but I would say I just kind of always felt this deep passion for women's issues and for family. And I always saw these issues of exploitation and abuse as like just damaging to women, damaging to the family, damaging to children. Even from just a young age, when I was like in middle school, I remember boys passing pornography around before school, like my friends. They were my friends, and they were joking about this material and kind of shaming a girl. And that was just had such an impact on me. And then, to college, where I saw like this hookup culture that was rampant, but among my friends, they all seemed so lonely and sad and kind of like felt worthless as people. And it just seemed like it was all connected to the exploitation and objectification culture. And then ultimately, I was living in Hungary and in Germany, where I saw exploitation just rampant. I was sexually harassed, assaulted myself, but I saw that rampant like all over the place. I saw trafficking and prostitution, child sexual abuse, and pornography. And to me, it just felt like they were all connected, and it was part of this like culture that was fueling each other. Like pornography was fueling the objectification and then the harassment culture on the streets in Hungary. And so I just thought, when I got back to the United States, I want to do something about that. I had no plan to do what I'm doing now. I just thought maybe I'd talk to store managers when I saw exploitation.
You're now the CEO of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. A lot of my friends, myself included, sometimes feel that trying to make a difference on these huge issues that are sometimes taking on these billion-dollar industries of exploitation seems futile. It feels fruitless. And I know that your organization has seen some wonderful victories. Can you tell us about some of the victories that you have achieved?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to add to that point you said, is it often does feel like you can't make a difference, and it feels so lonely. And that's why I'm here now, is because I felt like I must be the only voice, the only person that cares. And when I started just speaking up a little bit, I realized lots of other people around me cared. but they all just felt uncomfortable to talk about it and didn't know how. So that's where I am now. And then, yeah, we've had some major victories, because the reality is when you speak up, you almost always win. Like if I could like make a list of all the companies, the like local policies that we've tried to change and impact, it's like overwhelmingly the majority, they make changes. And so just a couple examples. One, I'm going to save the big one, I think, for last, because it's also connected to the other two speakers. But recently in the United States, we've been able to pass legislation at the state level that goes after sex buyers. And one thing is, like, we all agree sex trafficking is terrible and horrible and needs to be stopped. But the root is that there would be no sex trafficking if there was no demand from sex buyers. Like, it wouldn't even be a problem. And yet in many countries, we let the sex buyer, they're not even part of the discussion. And so we're starting to see legislation pass in America. It passed in 4 states just in the last year, where sex buyers face more accountability. Income-based fines, which then go to pay for services and healing for victims of trafficking. In one state of Texas, now it's a felony to purchase a person for sex, and it could be jail time right away. So I think that's a huge win. And in those places already, we're seeing that the sex trafficking marketplace, prostitution, has shrunk because the demand has shrunk. And other big wins just recently, our kids, like, exploitation and trafficking and pornography have really become kind of like the wallpaper of their lives. Like, they're seeing hypersexualized or even hardcore images like regularly because of their experiences online. And because the big tech companies have not prioritized our kids' safety, they have created like loopholes and really dangerous situations for our kids to be in, because tech hasn't been forced to prioritize their safety. So we went, for example, to Instagram after meeting with many youth who were trafficked. Like 13 years old was the oldest of the young girls that I met. They were trafficked on Instagram. And we went to Instagram after that and we said, look, all these kids were trafficked on your platform. And the way they were trafficked initially was because strangers could send direct messages to kids on your platform. Why is it ever okay for an adult stranger to send a private message to a kid they don't know? Instagram heard that, and after about 18 months, they changed their policy to no longer allow any adults to send private messages to kids, and that's worldwide now. Another major one was Google. Like, Google has these Chromebooks that are given out in our schools. Almost all of our kids now are virtual or using some element of being virtual for school, and they're either using an iPad or a Chromebook usually. The Chromebooks were so complicated. The iPad is too. We haven't moved Apple, but we moved Google. So we got Google to automatically, with just a system update last September, to turn on built-in like safety controls for the Chromebooks used in schools worldwide. I mean, you would think that would be kind of easy, right? Like, they should have done that years ago. Unfortunately, it took the pandemic and like thousands of mad parents to go to Google and say, but that's a major win. And we're seeing now that tech, because parents and concerned citizens are raising up and government leaders, tech is starting to prioritize child safety. The big one, though, is the porn industry, as we know. Like, the online pornography industry is radically changing just in the last 2 years. And I would even argue that Pornhub, which is really the biggest online like tube website, is crumbling right before our eyes. Things like lawsuits have been filed. We have a law center that started filing lawsuits. There are lawsuits in Canada and in the United States. Soon, we know some are being filed in Europe and Latin America, because victims who are sex trafficked, who are exploited as children, are having their images uploaded to these mainstream pornography websites. And these porn sites don't care. They're not removing it. They're trying to make as much money as they can. So lawsuits have started. We've got together with a lot of our allies, have gone after every mainstream company that was partnering with Pornhub and Big Porn and begged them to stop. And because so many victims have come forward, these companies have agreed. So companies like Visa, MasterCard, Discover, PayPal stopped processing payments for Pornhub, some for even more porn sites. Companies like Wish and Kraft Heinz stopped running advertisements, and 50% of their revenue comes from ads. So if we can cut that, we're really hurting their pocketbooks. Really importantly, there was an incredible hearing led by MP Arnold Viersen here, that called the leadership in into government hearings, and everyone around the world was tuning in and watching, because for the first time we were able to get a picture of who these criminals are and how they operate. And as a result, there's legislation now moving in multiple countries, including Canada, including the United States, that hampers the porn industry. There's so much good happening, and we can see it because just a couple of weeks ago, the executives fled the company and they laid off 70% of their workforce. Like, they are seeing it hurt. So yeah, I could talk.
Incredible.
There's so much good happening there.
I think we often feel powerless in the face of Google and Visa, MasterCard and Pornhub, and to hear the way and to see the way that your organization and your voice have been part of making a difference against Google and Pornhub and all these things are absolutely incredible. There's so many questions I want to ask you, but I'm also want to make sure we have time for everyone's questions coming in. So please feel free to ask your questions also in the Q&A box. And then before we go on to the next portion tonight, I want to ask you about public speaking. The issues that you address are issues that are taboo for some and uncomfortable for almost everybody. And so how do you address these topics? How do you help people be willing to open up their hearts and their ears to hear you on these really difficult topics? So how does the sensitivity to that inform the way that you do public speaking on combating exploitation?
Well, I think key is embracing the awkward. Like, it's just awkward. It's awkward often for the people listening and for you as the speaker sometimes to talk about these issues. And sometimes you could just admit it, like admit that you're maybe uncomfortable or they are. And it's like, oh, okay, we addressed the elephant in the room and now people are ready. The other thing I think that's helpful on these issues is when you realize that everyone has experienced an element of exploitation, abuse, and objectification. If it's not them, it's people they really love. And so you suddenly are giving them words and you're letting it come to light. And so it might feel uncomfortable at first, but in my experience, like a couple sentences in, people are actually really grateful that you're addressing these things and talking about it. I am like that angry mom with pitchfork. I'm a mom. Number 5 is on its way. I do this work also because of my kids, but I can't be that angry mom with a pitchfork when I'm speaking. I have to, kind of stay calm. I am emotional sometimes, but using science and facts and examples and stories really help to touch people's hearts and move them over the irrational side, which is actually how I probably am in my, when I'm talking to my husband.
I think that irrational side is actually very rational, but it's to be upset and angry over the stuff is completely rational, I believe. Yeah. But I so appreciate how you use your voice. Did you want to add something before we go on to the next?
The last thing I think is just really knowing your audience. It's so important to know who you're speaking to. Like, I would say things differently when I'm speaking to legislators or members of the media versus parents and kids or church people. I on these issues, I try not to be very graphic. It's already so overwhelming. It's yucky and icky stuff we're talking about when we're talking about what's happening in porn. But with a legislator or a member of the media, I can be more graphic so that they understand what it is I'm talking about. But in a church setting, I don't need to be that. They don't need to see this stuff, to understand how it's harming them. So really knowing your audience is a key piece of advice I have.
Amazing. Well, before we say goodbye for a few minutes, and then we'll bring you back on a few minutes later, my last question is, if people want to get involved with INCOSE, whether it's to follow your work or maybe even attend the incredible annual conference that you put on, or just get to be part of the difference that you're making, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, I come to endsexualexploitation.org, and we have so many ways, actions. We're not just giving you stuff to read. We ask you to sign petitions and sign letters and make calls. And it takes like 30 seconds from your phone. So join us at endsexualexploitation.org.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to see you in a few minutes. And if people have questions for Dawn, please be putting them in the Q&A box already. Well, we're going to give away a book. It is by the next speaker we're going to hear from soon. It's called Fighting for Our Daughters. This next speaker I heard first alongside Tim Keller at a week long of events of speaking. We heard speakers all day long, every day for the entire week. And this speaker is the only speaker that made me cry. I wept as she spoke to us about the work that she's doing on sexual exploitation and the way that we can be involved. So please welcome the CEO of City Women, coming to us live from Australia, Letitia Shelton. Welcome.
Hi, Daniel. Great to see you. And I don't know if it's a good thing that I made a man cry or not, but
you made me weep. Beautiful tears of just beauty of what you're doing. So let's start with what you're doing. Can you tell us the story of City Women and how you ended up being someone who is giving your day job, your time, to fighting sexual exploitation?
Yes, I actually returned from the United States in the year 2000 into the city of Toowoomba and became a pastor in our church. And one day the mayor of our city met with some of us church leaders and really challenged us, saying, you're doing great things inside your church, but why don't you get outside and do something for the young people of our city? And we took that challenge on board. She was so mad at us, actually. She swore at us. And I think sometimes the church is really good at just staying inside the buildings. So we took that challenge on board and we started working with teenage girls. We started these camps, which you've heard me talk about in the past, where we'd just take away 50 girls for a weekend. And one thing we did on that camp was we brought in a man just to apologise on behalf of pain that men have caused, whether it's been the abuse or a father who's left home or a boyfriend or and that's shocked us, because that would just unleash a room full of pain among these 50 teenage girls, where they just weep and weep and weep. And we've run 65 of those camps now and done that apology 65 times, and it's with different girls. We always take different girls from our community. And so I've sat and listened to thousands of stories of abuse in our city from, young girls between the ages of 11 and 16. And it was actually what kicked me off into speaking and particularly addressing the issue of pornography was, I think it was 2015, where I attended Nicosi's Global Summit in Florida, and sitting there and listening to it. And as they do, they bring a link between all, porn and prostitution and sexual abuse. And I just thought, oh, porn is fueling so much of the abuse of girls and women. So I went back to Toowoomba after that conference and met up with our mayor, who's a different mayor from the first one, and we launched what we call a city free from porn. So you want to get to, I guess, the root of what is causing the abuse, and when you realise that porn is driving so much of it, we've got to work at both ends, don't we? Healing the broken, but then addressing the issues of oppression. So that's what got me started.
Amazing. I had no idea that the previous speaker, Dawn, and her organization in COSI is part of your story. I realized that we didn't actually give away the book. I just announced it, but this is Fighting for Our Daughters, Letitia Shelton's book, one of many. It's called the subtitle is The Story of City Women, Unity and Mission in Toowoomba. And the winner of this book is Jenny. Jenny, we're going to message you for your address, and it will show up at your door. Now, Letitia, you mentioned the role of men in the healing process. I think there's a lot of issues where various demographics on a variety of issues are going to feel like they don't have a voice, either because they might not be involved in the justice issue or the injustice of it, they might feel like, or it's because they feel like their demographic is such a part of the abuse. Because I've done a lot of work on sexual abuse, I know men are sometimes victims too, and sometimes women are perpetrators, but often the work a lot of us are doing on sexual exploitation is more focused on women and girl victims and male perpetrators. And so I found myself sometimes feeling such, honestly, hatred toward men, which is why I just wept when you talked about the role when we were together in New York, and you were speaking about the role of men in being part of the healing journey. And so can you address this question of public speaking? What would you say to those who feel like they don't really have a right to speak to various issues and types of exploitation?
Yeah, a men's voice are just powerful in this fight, and quite often it's the angry mamas with the pitchforks who are leading the way because we feel and see it. But we've got to work together with men, and men, we need your voice. And I've just seen it so powerfully from our camps with just a man doing a simple apology. But just, yeah, anytime a man speaks, I think it adds an extra weight. And sometimes I think men, because of perhaps their own struggle, especially with pornography, they think, oh, I can't speak up. And I've said to men, I don't care if you say that you're still struggling with porn, but just speak out and say the harm it's doing. You know, we need your voice, and we need honesty and openness, and go and get help as well. But I think, you know, in my city, it has been the women who have led a lot of the way. We need men, and it does take a lot of courage when you've come in from your own struggles, or you've been abused yourself. I've just written a book on the abuse of women in Fiji. Fiji is a little Pacific island where 2 in 3 women are abused, and I'm about to do one on the abuse of men in Fiji too. And there's plenty of men out there with stories, but trying to get them to speak. I don't know what it is. It's just the shame, or, you know, men don't talk about their own abuse. We're used to women speaking about it, but men, we need your voice. It's powerful.
Well, thank you. By the same token, I know that we have a lot of women clients in public speaking who feel that their voice as a woman is often minimized and muted. You yourself are a global speaker on matters of exploitation. You're also a pastor of a church. What can you speak to women who feel minimized or like their voice isn't as welcome?
Yeah, look, I've spent the last 3 years studying the women in the Bible, and there's, women announced the resurrection of Jesus. They were announcing that the scrolls were the word of God. I mean, women's voice, and Jesus never once tried to shut them up or minimize them, or, you know, get them to be quiet. So I think the enemy's threatened by a woman's voice and what we have to say. Now, there's a way we should say it. I don't think it helps if we're trying to prove a point or trying to prove that women can speak. But I guess I've been challenged, unfortunately, as I've spoken in churches all over the world by the scripture. It's usually young men coming up and telling me that 2 Timothy tells me I should be quiet. And I can kind of laugh it off because that's not how I read scripture, and that's not how Jesus views women and their voice. He always made a way for their voice. And so we've just got to know what we believe and why we believe it, and then stand firm in it no matter the opposition or what people throw at us. And it's going to come, and that's okay. It means you're doing something good. So we do. I think the enemy has silenced us for too long, and especially in the church, and we've got to speak up.
Thank you. One of the challenges of speaking up about matters of exploitation is, although there are a number of victories, and you and Dawn and our next speaker, Arnold, have all been part of some magnificent victories. When we're speaking about areas of brokenness, it's often slow improvements. One of the things many of us tuning in tonight who have spoken up on matters of injustice have felt the temptation towards cynicism and even despair, which leads to silence as we give up. So how have you managed to guard your heart against growing bitter and despairing, and how do you maintain hope as you speak up on matters of exploitation?
Yeah, firstly, again, I think you've got to expect opposition. And if you begin to speak up and someone doesn't agree with you and you quit in the first 2 minutes, then maybe you weren't the right person in the first place. Or I think coming into it knowing that there's going to be hardcore opposition, public opposition. I mean, when you talk to Dawn and Arnold, they probably had life-threatening opposition. And so you've got to stand strong and have a good support group around you, a really good support group. And then you've got to link in. And I mean, we've just heard Dawn talk about the victories. Heck, that's incredible. And so that's why I make sure I link in with Nkosi in Australia, with Collective Shout. with these bigger groups, because I'm just a little fish in the pond, but there's these bigger groups that are having some great wins. And so we've had their win is my win. We're all in this together. And so we rejoice together over it. And so, yeah, just hooking in with those who are having some wins, but just knowing it's the long-term battle as well. For me, you know, I'm in this until I'm 95. So if I live that long, so, you know, some days are great and other days just suck, and that's okay. I think you just got to have a bigger picture perspective on it. And then on a really practical note, I love to cycle. And seriously, road cycling has probably saved my head on many times. You'll come home, have a bad day and just get on your bike and ride for hours sometimes. So you've got to have those physical outlets as well. So they're just some practical ways.
Well, thank you. Well, here's our final question for this segment. You have brought together people in politics and business executives and people from different denominations. Is the way that you address the topics of exploitation, pornography, sexual abuse, does that change depending on which demographic or sector you're speaking to? And if so, what advice can you give us who speak to different audiences?
Yes, I think Dawn answered this question really well. You've got to know your audience. You can take different data to different groups. But in my own city, because, you know, we've been heading up this City Free from Porn campaign, and I'm in a city of only about 150,000, so it's small. So a lot of me working with these groups has meant a lot of coffees with just one-on-ones. So, you know, with the police, and it was 3 years of me having coffee before he finally said, I believe that porn is fueling a lot of sexual abuse. So that was 3 years of me just sitting with him, taking him data, telling him stories. So, and our politicians, people are afraid to go talk to their politicians because they think they're really important, which you are, Arnold. But they actually represent us. And most politicians aren't sitting in their office researching exploitation issues, and especially local ones. They're trying to work out how to get the rubbish picked up. And so it's actually our job as citizens to go and meet with them and fill them in on issues that are particularly hurting the vulnerable. So again, it's just been a lot of coffees with my local politicians, taking them books, telling them stories, inviting them. I invite them to every event I do. And then same with our school principals. You go and meet with them. So a lot of the work is not big, high-level public speaking. I think some of our most significant talking opportunities can be one-on-one. So don't forget that either. But just go, especially with politicians, don't waste their time. Go knowing your stuff and wanting to help them is really important. So our politicians, our main politicians in my city are all on board because of my coffee meetings with them. And good thing I love coffee.
Letitia, thank you so much. We're going to have a chance to ask your questions, everyone who's watching. So please submit your questions for Letitia, the work that she does, how to make a difference, and how to grow in our public speaking. So please submit your questions. We're going to give away the book that she mentioned, which is Destructive Voices of Fijian Women. This is a book that Letitia recently wrote. And the winner of this book is Lizzie. Lizzie, we're going to email you, get your address, and the book will show up at your door. So Letitia, thank you so much, and we'll see you back in a few minutes. I'm going to bring up the next speaker. He is the member of a Canadian member of Parliament. He represents Peace River Westlock, rural northern Alberta. And he is a hero to me for so many different reasons, including the fact that he is the founder and co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group to end modern slavery and human trafficking. A lot of us watching the news will see headlines all the time of a rising partisanship and polarization, and we have the feeling that politicians never work together. Well, it is a rare thing, but it happens. And it happens because of the courage and vulnerability of people like Arnold Viersen. So please give a warm digital welcome to Member of Parliament, Arnold Viersen. Arnold, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dan.
Hey, Arnold, you've also seen some great successes, but I know the first time that you kind of publicly spoke up about porn, it didn't go very well. Can you tell us that story and how that went?
Oh, well, yeah. So I remember getting involved in politics, or getting elected anyways, and being chosen in the lottery for private members bills number 37. And so that was like early on, and I had to do something with that position. So I remember driving to work one morning, and there was a story of Letitia Parsons. It was a 14-year-old girl who was raped at a party by 6 boys, and they posted the videos of this rape on their Facebook pages as like brag stories. And I remember thinking, like, how in the world did these guys think that this was normal? And so when I got elected, I thought I wanted to do something about that. Letitia Parsons later on committed suicide over this whole thing, and so kind of in her memory, we wanted to like tackle this issue. And I came to after talking to a lot of people across the country, came to the conclusion that what those boys had acted out was the pornography that they were watching. And so we started down the path of combating pornography in Canada, looking at Canada through the public health lens. And I brought a motion to the Conservative Party policy convention. It wasn't the main convention, it was like one of the feeders. So it was the Alberta, so the province that I represent, or part of, we call it Alberta Congress, and it's kind of the feeder for the main policy conference. And so we test all our local policies in Alberta first, and then we bring them to the national level. And so that room was probably about 150 people in that room. And I brought a like, hey, the Conservative Party of Canada ought to work to declare pornography a public health crisis and work to reduce the usage of pornography in Canada. That policy then goes through a round of debate. And so there's people that speak for it, there's people that speak against it, and then there's an opportunity for a caucus, so members of parliament, to then respond. And so then it was basically, I stood up to say that, and I said, if this fails, I suppose that will be a great indictment on the amount of pornography use of this room, so to speak. And needless to say, it failed. I think we had like 10 votes to 120 votes or something like that. So it didn't go very far at all, which was a stunning indictment. And I got laughed off the stage over that. That said, that was a little bit deterring. I'm not going to admit that, or I'm not going to say that it wasn't. But I moved a motion in Parliament that passed unanimously, M47, calling on the government to do a study on the impacts of pornography in Canada. That passed unanimously through Parliament, and I brought the similar motion back to the next policy convention, and that one passed. I don't remember exactly the numbers, but we got it passed like two years later, so to speak. So yeah, it was the first time I got laughed off the stage, but the second go around, we got her done. So
I'm glad you didn't give up. I remember the first time, like Arnold and I had been in touch about this motion he's going to bring forward at that Alberta convention. And so I was just with great expectation, trusting it was going to go amazing. Talked to him afterward. I'm like, Arnold, how did it go? And he just goes, terrible. And at first I thought he was kidding because he kind of laughed. He's like, terrible. I was like, well, what happened? He's like, I got laughed off the stage. And I was so, at that moment, I didn't know Arnold that well. And I was afraid that might be the end of the road. Arnold, I'm so glad you didn't give up and that you're still leading the charge. So after not giving up and continuing to bring forward a motion on this in Parliament, you got unanimous consent. You've also brought together MPs from every political party with all party groups to fight human trafficking, to end human trafficking. Can you speak to us about how do you bring unity on such difficult topics?
So I think part of it is the language that you use. So one of the things was in my motion, I didn't use the word pornography, I used sexually explicit online material. I think that took some of the barbs out of it a little bit. But the other thing is like just straight up go talk to people. A lot of the things that happen in Parliament are personal relationships that you have, and you develop those relationships on areas of shared interest, and then you can use those relationships for areas that you care about. And so the fact of the matter is that, like, while this is something that I was concerned about and wanted to work on, the vast majority of members of Parliament all have their pet topic. that they care about and want to work on, and it's not the same as yours. And so you have to be able to work, like push their initiatives and get them to help you push yours. And so it's collaborative, but it's also a little bit sometimes it's a little bit risky in the fact that you have to go reach out to people, and rejection's a reality. That's happens, but there's 338 members of parliament in the Canadian Parliament, and you need a handful to get something moving, and there's usually a handful that think similarly as you do on any particular topic, and it's just a matter of knocking on a lot of doors, sending a lot of emails, and going for coffee, as Letitia says. That's a real thing.
Absolutely. Arnold, I know that you are really passionate about precise language. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so that's particularly in political world. Somebody once said that politics is the war over the dictionary, and I 100% agree with that. How we define words and how we use words is what politics is all about. We go to parliament. Parliament is the parle, is the speak. We talk. That's how we sort things out there, and to use words correctly, but then also to ensure that you use terminology that backs up your initiative. And you see this often is like we as conservatives, we lots of times complain about this, how words get redefined, and that's not what the word means. But that's those are some of the things, is to make sure that the language that you use is the language that you use. I'm struggling a little bit to make that clear, but
you can show the PowerPoint if you like.
Yeah, for example, particularly around the prostitution area, yeah, my terms, positive terms, this is the Leesburg grid, but particularly when we're dealing with on the prostitution area, I use prostituted person or prostituted woman, not a sex worker, right? The other side wants to use the term sex worker and sex worker, and I just don't use those terms, because I don't believe that is those. I don't even think that's a real thing, right? And it's around that that becomes is a big part of the political debate. Now, the Leesburg grid, I use this, and I think I'm not even using it quite correctly, but it's a political grid for figuring out any kind of debate, and you actually end up plotting the terms on it. So some terms will fall really close to the middle, and it's not really a big deal to use the term one way or the other. But going back to the prostitution debate, their terms, positive terms, so to speak, would be like sex worker. Yeah, here you've got it in here. You got sex work, sex industry, that kind of thing. Like empowerment, that might be like more towards the center kind of thing. In any kind of political debate that you're having, if they are using your terms, you're winning the debate. Even if they're talking about it negatively, or they're saying this is bad, or all those kinds of things, as long as they're using your terms, as long as they're talking about human trafficking, as long as they're talking about modern day slavery, as long as they're talking about exploitation, your side of whatever you're trying to push will be holding the day. If you're talking about sex work and the sex industry, that you're losing ground, even though you might be saying all kinds of terrible, like saying that this is not what we want, and you're arguing against it, because you're using their terminology. It is difficult to then win the argument, because you're granting the premise of that sex work is just work. If anybody has Googled me, sex work is just work is it has made me very famous, because a NDP member of Parliament asked me stated that sex work was just work, and then I asked her if she'd ever considered it, given that it was just work, and that didn't go over real well. But nonetheless, that is that's very much like just part of discussion or part of debate, is to ensure that you don't use terminology that you don't believe or that you don't even think is real. and sex work is not a real thing. I just refuse to use that terminology. And I sometimes you struggle because the other side has defined it so much already in our culture, that you do an interview with people and they just bring the premise right along with it. They like, well, how about like sex workers? Don't you think that they should get EI the same as everybody else, right? Like that to answer that question, you have to unwind it and just go back to like, hey, sex work's not work. This is exploitation, right? And I don't think that anybody should be exploited. I don't think that exploited people, that's my son joining me here, exploited people, I think that exploited people should be taken out of exploitation, not being coddled by the government in that situation.
Well, thanks so much, Arnold. I know there's people tuning in on so many different matters that people are advocating on. You can take the grid that we showed that Arnold had taught the office. I worked part-time for him, and recently as a team, we had that grid. They explained it, Arnold's assistant Curtis. And then after explaining it, we went through as a team and just filled out for a number of different issues that Arnold advocates for. And Arnold, you advocate for some very different issues, but we were able to just fill it out for everything from stuff on human trafficking to stuff that's very dear to Albertans' hearts.
And I'm a visual guy, and so that writing it out like the way that we do really just helps in your own head clarify the terms. That's important. So
I hope that for those tuning in, including myself, that this is something that whatever speech you're preparing for, or if it's a coffee with someone, as Letitia mentioned, that you'll take time perhaps. This is one of the most practical things from tonight. If you fill out that grid, just what the actual individual words are, the terms that are positive are terms, negative are terms, and then the opposite, that should inform the way that we speak about this. So with that, Arnold, thank you so much for sharing what you have. We're going to bring you back up in a few minutes. And then we're going to give everyone the book first and make a quick announcement. And then I'll ask the questions that have been pouring in. So we have two quick announcements. And I'm really excited to share them with you. The first is that the next webinar we're doing is going to be August 11th. And it is with Her Imperial and Royal Highness, Kathleen, the Archduchess of Australia. By Australia, I mean Austria. So she's going to be speaking together with the former Chancellor of the Exchequer of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Aitken. He is a speaker and author, and he also himself went from one of the highest offices in the United Kingdom to one of the highest max prisons. That's part of his incredible story. The two of them are together going to be doing a webinar, interactive like tonight, where we're going to be able to ask her questions on the topic, how to speak like the Queen, public speaking coaching lessons from the Queen of England. So we're going to be hearing a little bit of their stories, because they're such fascinating stories, how they became and are doing what they're doing, these two individuals. And then we're going to watch clips of Queen Elizabeth II, and we are going to get their advice on all that we can mine in her speaking. So along those lines, and in honor of this upcoming webinar, we're giving away this beautiful book called The Queen. And the winner of this gorgeous book is Lori from Alberta. This book is yours. So we're going to mail this right to your door. And I'm going to put in a few minutes, I'll put the link so that you can sign up tonight. And if you sign up in the next 24 hours, you're going to be automatically entered in to win another book draw, which will likely be this book. So that's the first announcement. The second announcement is that we're going to be launching another masterclass. This is a 12-week course in public speaking. It's exclusively for women. And the coaches and speakers who are going to be leading you through that include Rachel Den Hollander. She was recognized by Time Magazine as one of the top 100 most powerful voices in the world. That's not why we're bringing her. We're bringing her because she is one of our favorite voices on using your voice to make a beautiful difference in the world. She's an author, an advocate, and a lawyer, and she is going to be, it's not a webinar like tonight where it's a little bit more just us speaking to you, receiving your questions, but this is going to be a Zoom call. You'll get to meet Rachel Den Hollander and Dr. Karen Swallow-Prior and Mary DeMuth and Claire Williams coming in from the United Kingdom, and a host of other incredible coaches and speakers. And so it's really hope you can be part of that. And I'm going to put the link to both of those in the chat in just a minute. But with that said, please welcome back our three speakers, and we're going to dive into the questions that have come from those of you tuning in tonight. The first question is from Doug. He asks, what is your best advice for someone who has a heart for victims of human trafficking, and how they can identify and help victims in their own communities? Let's start with you, Dawn.
Which one should I answer? Well, I would say, I mean, there's a lot to do. One is there's a number of trainings. I mean, even like YouTube has really phenomenal trainings about how to recognize different signs of human trafficking. So I would go take a look at that. But really, there's so many other things to do in your community. And it's not always on you to like look for and find the victim, but rather, you know, often you don't recognize them and you won't notice. And so if you can help, you know, educate the churches, the schools, the youth on how to combat and prevent this from happening, if you can provide support to your law enforcement, and hopefully, you know, there's direct service organizations that are local to your community. And if there's not a direct service organization specifically serving survivors of trafficking, then often the domestic violence shelters or the homeless shelters are also just helping survivors of trafficking too, and they need support and help. And so I would just urge you to look for these other ways in the community to beef up the recovery services and the prevention efforts. What else would you all add out there?
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I mean, the stuff will already be happening, especially if you're in larger cities. So just, they all want help. So they'd love to hear from you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I just add to that, I guess, like if you want a real quick to get into making a difference on this, is just start having conversations about like telling your friends to quit looking at porn. It all starts right there, and you can have that with that conversation with the next person that you meet. The first one's probably going to be a little bit awkward, but after your 100th conversation about how, like, learning how to say, hey, like, your porn use is connected to human trafficking, that's a good place to start.
Okay, thank you. The next question is anonymous, and it is, how do you sensitively talk about your work to children?
And I see, well, that I have little kids and I talk all the time about this. I mean, they hear me say these words sometimes. So at this point I have to address it. But what I've experienced with my kids, but also like my neighbors and church kids and school kids that I speak to, is they already are hearing this stuff. Their curiosity is already piqued. If they're on any digital devices, they're likely already seeing material, even at really young ages, that's like not what you want them to see. And they're actually like relieved when you address it and when you start the conversation, when you help them understand that's not real like intimacy, that's not how it's supposed to be, that's not what's expected of you. Here's how you can respond when you see things. It's like they need you as parents and adults in their lives to help them make sense of it. Otherwise they feel lonely, they feel that like that distance, that depression that comes from feeling icky, and they don't know what to do about it. And so they keep maybe turning to Google or to places you don't want them to turn. So some people worry if you talk about it, they might be curious and look it up. That's generally not happening, especially if you're just really forthcoming about it and you have frequent conversations.
Thank you, Dawn. Letitia or Arnold, do you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I'm not a mother and I don't speak a lot to kids or audiences with kids, but I've got nephews and nieces who are beginning to ask what I do and what particular things are. So I just went up, there's some great resources, How to Speak to Your Kids About Porn. That's a brilliant book, Defend Young Minds. And so they just lay out step by step on how to have these conversations, just like Dawn was saying, in age appropriate ways that you don't go in too deep. But so for myself as a non-mother, I've just found some of the tools that are out there just really helpful.
I'm afraid I don't have anything different to say. There's a great book out there called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I read it with my kids. We just have it sitting in the pile of books that sits there, and that book gets grabbed as often as any of the other books, and I have to read it to my kids before they go to bed at night. So, and that's a great place to start. So yeah, there's lots of great resources out there. The Google machine will help you find them all.
Absolutely. Okay, the next question is, how do we ensure that our movements or organizations and ourselves are being survivor-led?
That's so important. I don't mean to talk so much, you guys.
Don, that's why we booked you. Go for it.
Well, I think being humble, especially as someone who is not a survivor of trafficking, like I've had other experiences with exploitation, but being humble and inviting them to the table, asking them to lead, giving them a platform, asking them to review and help to build your strategy. And I mean, that's how we've seen just massive success. And I would say that when the COSI, National Center on Sexual Exploitation, really prioritized having survivor leaders at every level of our advocacy, from strategy and planning to actually like attending key meetings, that's when we've seen massive progress and victories. They know the answers, often better than we can guess at, because they've lived it. And they bring heart and passion. And so I think just being humble, recognizing you don't have all the answers, ask them for the answers, ask them to lead, and treat them as experts like they are, and not, as a side like story. I think that's happened a lot in our movement, and many survivors have been re-exploited by people with good hearts or intentions who don't see them as the experts that they are. So I could say so much about this. I just feel so passionate that we need survivor leaders to be, they need to be leading, and we should be following. So yeah.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, no, you've said it well. I've just finished reading Mary DeMuth's book. Interesting that you her. We too. It's awesome. And she just said it's not necessarily facts that are going to change the argument, but it's stories. And she has a great chapter on the power of stories. And so their stories are vital. And like Dawn mentioned, I'm not a survivor, or don't have my own personal stories, but these other people do. And they've profoundly impacted my life over the years. And it's because of them that you do what you do. And working alongside of them is such a privilege, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In my realm of work, a survivor is just hard to argue with. When I bring survivors into Parliament, they tell their story, they give their state, they state their facts, and they're hard to argue with. So that's survivors are immensely valuable to have as part of your argument as you bring forward.
Absolutely. The next question is also anonymous, and it is simply this: what are some of the pitfalls in speaking about exploitation?
I think a couple of ones that just come to mind right away is often we might exaggerate, people on our side might exaggerate what the research is saying or extrapolate like statistics. And the reality is you don't need to exaggerate anything, because the reality is so bad. You don't need to try to make the case with like numbers and stuff like that. So I think that has been a big weakness. Another is, I think, piggybacking on the last question, is how sometimes leaders in this movement have treated survivors, just using them for their stories, not paying them as the issue experts that they are. And that's really hurt our movement a lot. And what else? There's a lot. What would you guys add?
For me, well, because I do talk to a lot of church groups, being a pastor, and I've got to keep reminding myself, just because I'm in a church, there will be porn addicts and domestic violence perpetrators, and sometimes I think, you speak to them thinking that they've got it all under control. So I've continually got to remind myself that there'll be suffering people in front of me, and to be sensitive to that, and to allow them a space and a place to get help, and come and speak to me afterwards. So I think that's, again, just to be sensitive and just know that there's people everywhere who have their own story and may have never told anyone.
Yeah.
My probably the pitfall that I run into most often is I start at 45 miles an hour, and I should slow down, because this is stuff I talk about all day long, every day. I and the kind of community of people that I've like when Nikosi puts on their big summit there, I say we bring the army together, and there you can start at 45 miles an hour, but to always like step back and remember that the folks you're talking to may never ever have thought about this for a moment, like to connect pornography with prostitution or pornography with sexual exploitation isn't their pornography use and human trafficking. They've never even thought about it for a moment. So you might have to step back and start laying a little bit more groundwork. Start at 20 mile an hour instead of starting at 45. So.
Absolutely. Hey, we're almost out of time. I'm going to have one more question after the following, but I've noticed Arnold has mentioned it. I've mentioned it. Letitia, I did not know this was part of her story and how she got involved in the work she's doing. But we've all been to Dawn's conference. Dawn, when is the next conference? Is it already scheduled? And where can people get more information?
It is. It's November 8th through 10th, and it's online this year. So all of you can attend, and it's free to attend. Last year, there were 15,000 people from like over 100 countries. And it's really like those people who are leaders in this movement or want to get way more involved. So you come and you can learn from folks who've been doing this for decades. You can get 101 all the way to like way in-depth presentations. And it just is a chance to get to know each other, which like I felt so alone. and that summit has brought me closer to you all and others to realize in those difficult, sad moments, we're not alone, and there's an army here. So.
It's such a good conference. I'm going to be attending there once again. I was floored by the way, like I've been there in person with Arnold, as has Letitia, but then I've been like floored at the way you are able to take some of the best of in person and bring that online, which almost never happens. But like there was so much networking and friendships built through your last online conference. It floored me how you choreograph it so well. Okay, here's our last question for the night. Some of those tuning in are also members of parliament and pastors and people with platforms and stages to make a difference. But for those who have this burning in their bones to be a voice against exploitation, and yet right now they don't have a platform and they don't have a avenue to use their voice to make a difference, what advice would you give someone who's just starting out?
Yeah, I think it's, oh, go ahead, Arnold.
I would just say is that the three of us were all, or the four of us were all sitting in that position at one point in our lives as well. So it's start like make a plan and start pursuing it, and seize opportunity. Like there's often an opportunity laying right there in front of you. You just have to seize it. It's not like don't be looking at somebody else's life for a model on how to run yours. Look for the opportunity that exists already in your life and work from there.
Yeah, and I think it is just whether you've got a platform or not, just start with the group of friends, those coffee meetings. You can have a huge impact just through one in those relationships. So don't be afraid of that either. It's really important.
And I would just say, wherever and whenever you see sexual exploitation just rearing its ugly head, if you can speak up, and you know, it could be a private anonymous message, or it could be a bold like statement where you're confronting someone. And then also, I just want to encourage you, like, we need everybody. We need communications experts. We need graphic designers. We need politicians. We need CEOs. We need like everyone with their unique skills to build this movement. And it's not like there's one type of individual or voice or skill that's making a difference. It needs to be all, like, so many. We need diversity. And so even if you think I don't have the skills, or that's not what my job role is, like, we even need accountants and, you know, like researchers and writers.
Even accountants.
So there's a gentleman, he's the COO of Scotiabank, which is a big bank here in Canada, and his specialty is algorithms. That's his thing, and yet he just hates human trafficking. And so he now has Scotiabank using the top-notch, cutting-edge algorithmic stuff to catch human traffickers and get them put in jail. It's incredible stuff. And getting to hear him share about that is remarkable. So truly, whether you are a data and IT person or accounting or whatever genre you are in, even more than you want to make a difference, like a difference needs to be made. So please just be there. And you might get laughed off the stage like Arnold had happened to him. But if you don't give up like Arnold, then like Arnold, you're going to be able to make a beautiful difference. Well, thank you, the three of you, for sharing from your expertise and experience. We know that tomorrow, or for Letitia, I know it's the morning in Australia. So today, as you head into the office, you're all day in and day out making a difference, using your voices to fight against exploitation and honor victims. And we're so grateful for you. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Yeah, have a great night, or Letitia, have a great morning. For those who attendees, stay with me. We're giving away one more book. It's this gorgeous book by my brother, Josh Gilman. It's The King's Daughter, and it addresses matters of exploitation from a human dignity perspective. It's a beautiful story of this little girl who experiences abuse, and it's this beautiful redemptive story of her unshakable worth. The winner of this book is Doug from Alberta. Doug, this book is going to show up at your door. We'll be in touch. Everyone, I hope to see you at How to Speak Like the Queen or at the Women's Masterclass. Have a great night.